Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to Molten Modular. Today we're looking at the Deckard's Voice from Black Corporation. Deckard's Voice is a single voice of their Deckard's Dream synthesizer, which is a synthesizer inspired by the classic, the legendary, the great big, fat and wonderful Yamaha CS80. The CS80 was a favourite polyphonic analog synthesizer of people like Vangelis and was used all over the Blade Runner soundtrack. And it is absolutely that sort of sound, that sci-fi, spacey, warm, long and intriguing sound that we're always expecting to get from it. Sort of sound, it's that sort of long phased, pumping, filtered, beautiful sounding soundscapes and environments that come pumping out of the CS80. That is the sort of sound that we imagine, that we're trying to capture, that we think that this module will absolutely and inevitably produce. And you're not wrong, but that's not all of it. That's not all of it. Because the interesting thing is that they've pulled this voice out of a polyphonic synthesizer, put it into Eurorack. What does that mean? How does that change the way that we approach it? Because it's no longer big pads, big stabs, big brassy sounds. We're down to a single voice. One of these. One of these. A single voice in the Deckard's Dream. I'm building a Deckard's Dream, as you're probably aware. And I'm getting there. Look at all those resistors I've got on there now. 8 of these there are in the Deckard's Dream. 8-voice polyphonic analog synthesizer. This is a single one of these inside. And while that brings a huge amount of limitations in terms of polyphony, it also gives Black Corporation an opportunity to look at it differently. And gives us the opportunity to look at it differently as well. And by that I mean they've pulled out all of these patch points. All these patch points that don't exist on the Deckard's Dream, don't exist on the CS80, and allows us to integrate it into Eurorack in interesting and potentially exciting ways. Let's hope it's exciting. And so because you're in Eurorack, you're actually more likely to be pumping little sequences into it rather than big long keyboard pieces. And it's really interesting to see how the Deckard's Voice fares in that sort of environment, with that sort of input, and with these sorts of modulations. And just as a quick example, using the arpeggiator from the Arturia key step over here, it's actually an awful lot of fun. See, the thing with it is that it's immensely playable. And so you just lose time all the time playing with it. So hopefully in the course of this video I'll be able to plug a few things in, make a few sounds and give you an idea about what the Deckard's voice is all about. And I should point out that Black Corporation have sent the Deckard's voice to me for review, partly because they think I'm incredibly groovy, but also to encourage me to get on, to be inspired and to finish the Deckard's dream. The Deckard's dream that I'm building over here. And I have to say it absolutely has, because, it's not to give too much away, but it sounds fantastic. And to have 8 of those in a synthesizer, now that's amazing. But let's not get distracted into the Deckard's dream. Let's stick with the voice, see what that has to offer us. I mean, one of the first things you'll notice is just simply how beautiful it is. I mean, nothing else has this sort of colour, nothing else has these colours on the sliders. There are sliders around the place in Eurorack, but nothing quite looks like this. You'll also notice that it doesn't have a single blooming LED on it. Nothing that will tell you that the thing is actually on and working. But otherwise, as an object, as a Eurorack module, the design is just gorgeous. And what these 2 rows of faders represent is actually a single layer in the Deckard's dream. So all the way along here is what you get in the big synth, and then these sections here are translated into 2 layers of stuff on the Deckard's voice. So you get oscillators, noise generation, pulse width modulation here, filter section with their envelope here, octave detuning, the LFO section here, and then the mixer and final envelope at the end. It uses slightly strange inputs and outputs in that you have a master out, which just takes the output of everything, but you also have a mix out, which is just a mix of the waveforms. You also have individual waveform outputs. So they decided to give you everything, because traditionally within the Deckard's dream and the CS80, there's no real mixing ability over waveforms. It just is what it is, and you'll hear that in a moment. But with these individual outputs, you can actually take those out and mix those separately, which is something that's not available in any other version of the CS80. One other thing is that there's no ability to drone. It has a gate and a 1 volt per octave input. It's very assuming you're going to plug a keyboard in or plug a sequencer in. So there isn't, as far as I can work out, a way just to let it sound. So what I'll do is I'll just pump in a sequence and then I'll explore the sounds a little bit. Filter out of the way to start with. So here we have purely sine wave. I've got a little bit of reverb on. Sine wave comes through here, and this sine wave is separate. It doesn't go through the filter. It's an individual and separate part of the system. So no filtering or anything like that is going to have any effect on it. So the other waveforms, the square, sawtooth and the noise, they all come in on this fader here, the filter level fader, because all of that's going through the filter. So let's turn on the square wave. I find these buttons a little bit upside down. I tend to think as pushing up to be on and down to be off, but this is definitely down to be on. This is our square wave here. Then with pulse width modulation you can set the sort of pulse you want it to be, from a thin one, sort of a 90% one, to more of a square wave at the bottom. You've then got pulse width modulation amount and speed. It's a really nice thing. You push it to really fast, you can start to find other tones in there. Whether they're happy tones or not, that's entirely up to you. Another alternative waveform is this sawtooth. So the pulse width has nothing to do with it, it's purely running through the filter. And of course you can run these together. And then you've got noise. Blend in. And then we're into the filter section. Now of course much of the sound comes from the filter, and working out how best to use it. Has a nice break to it when you're on high resonance. It just breaks itself slightly when you get that right. Pass and a low pass filter. So this is the low pass I'm playing with at the moment. It also has a high pass, which can destroy everything, of course, depending on where you've put it. And so from the two, you can either get a bit of band pass going on, or just one and the other. Next along here we have the envelope for the filter. Now the envelope is a little bit unique. It's taken from the CS80. It's Yamaha's slightly different take on a filter envelope, which has taken me a little bit of time to get my head around, because we're very familiar with the way that envelopes and filters tend to work in modular, and this is slightly different because you have these two faders here, IL and AL, initial level and attack level. What do they mean? Well, what it does is that it offsets the envelope around the cutoff. Normally speaking, on an envelope you have a cutoff knob is set, and then your envelope will attack up from that cutoff level, will go up and then down and then fall back to this level again. What initial level and attack level do is that they separate that initial level from the cutoff. So the cutoff no longer sets the start of the filter in the envelope. The start is set by initial level. Now weirdly, this goes from 0 to -5, which means as you push it up, the sort of the metaphorical envelope I have coming off here is actually starting further down. So as I push this towards -5, the starting point of the envelope is now below the cutoff. So I push that up and it goes below. Does that make sense? And then from that lower point it will move to whatever's set onto the attack level on this one, which goes from 0 to +5. So this happens above the cutoff. So the cutoff kind of sets the middle point, if you like. Put that to maximum and that to maximum, then the envelope's going to start there and go up to the top and then carry on, depending of course on how long it is with the attack here. So let's see if I can demonstrate it. Okay, if I take these two out, the filter is where this is. And with these two not in play, there's no attack at all, because the attack is the difference between these two, and at the moment they're both on nothing. So if I push the attack level up and increase the attack on the filter, I should get the sound of a normal envelope on a filter. So it's moving from the cutoff position to the top. Now as I increase the initial level, it should drag that starting point further down. And also increase the attack. That's the idea anyway. I mean, how you use that differently within creating an envelope for the filter, I don't really know. All I know is that I'm still fiddling with these a little bit and fiddling with these in order to try to get it to do the sort of filtering that I want it to do. So is that helpful or not? I don't know. I mean, the differences are subtle, I guess. Certainly in your head you can imagine, oh right, so it's sort of folding itself around the cutoff rather than anything else. But usually when you're just doing a thing, you just want it to work. But you can certainly hear how there is a change going on. find quite interesting is that when you introduce the sine wave, it sort of mixes in and it brings a softness. Let me turn that around. This is just the sawtooth and square wave. And as I bring the sine in, the way it combines seems to flatten certain edges, brings a roundness to it, which is quite interesting. But it's not something that you necessarily want all the time. And so it has much more fruitiness, I think, without it. But it brings in this level of softness. Moving on to the low frequency oscillator then, you have various waveforms at the side, sine wave, ramps up and down, square wave, random and sample and hold. So let me just give you an example of what that does. So we bring in the filter, stick that up to sine wave, up the speed a little bit. Just on and off. Again, by pushing the speed to the top, you can pull out some of those extra funny, lovely tones. Random just pumps into the cutoff just a random generation of values. Sample and hold is different. Sample and hold gives you a new value on every single gate input. And of course you can also direct this to the oscillator, if that's useful. And also the amplifier. The range of sounds available from the Deckard's voice are great, are pretty good. It's just so much fun to play with. It's not as if you're trying to work really hard to tease out some sort of interesting sound. Everything responds well. Everything sounds good. You build things up, you thicken it all out with the pulse width modulation going on, then you bring the noise in with the sine wave coming in to soften those corners. You sort of thicken it, and then you can pull it right back to just being a sawtooth wave, to just being that oscillator sound, that 3340 oscillator sound that we enjoy so much in so many other synthesizers. And it's all there with this pretty unique sounding filter. The filter system is what I think makes it the most intriguing. It's very different to anything else that I have. Not massively different, but it's just different. It works differently, and so you're fiddling and tweaking and adjusting those sliders differently to how you would with something else. And then it has this to it, this when you push it, when you hit that resonance. It's not an overwhelming, crazy, oh my goodness, this is all over the place type resonance. It's a contained resonance, but it has this ability to just break itself slightly and then come back again. It has this nasal quality maybe at times, which is interesting. I mean, that I guess is where the brassiness of it comes from, and also it has a very vocal sound, particularly when you start band passing. You bring that high pass filter in as well. It starts to really get throaty, which is interesting. So having played with the voice by itself, I'm now going to plug it into lots of other bits of Eurorack to see what sort of effect that could have. For instance, I'm very interested in taking the individual waveforms out, mixing those together through something and running it through a different filter. Is it just bog standard Eurorack sounding stuff, or does it sound awesome? I don't know. Let's find out. Let's find out what Brilliance means. I guess that's kind of moving the cutoff a bit, is it? Velocity, I guess, is changing the amplifier up and down a little bit. You've also got an FM input snuck away under these two cables here in a sync that you can hardly see, and I mustn't forget to plug something into that. So I'll just do a load of that without talking too much about it, and I'll come back at the end and we can just go, what do we think? So in this patch I've got a simple sequence coming from the black sequencer into the Deckard's voice using some more variable gates. Bit of interest. I've also taken the 4 waveform outputs, put them through a mixer, put them through the Joe filter at the top here with an envelope, just to get a comparison, I suppose. So here's the voice by itself. To the Joe. Now the gates going to both of them are slightly different. So we put them together, they might complement each other. Some modulations in. Sort of already have these things going on, the brilliance, which is essentially affecting the cutoff, and the velocity, which is affecting the amplifier, because I can have this already in here. However, there's no real way to clock this LFO in here to anything, so using the one from the Maestro allows me to do that. something into the filter. So this, I'm taking the output from an on-a oscillator up here, routing that into the filter input. you have it, the Deckard's voice. What a dreamy thing. Yeah, well, it's a load of fun to play with, without any doubt. It can create a wide range of synthy sounds. It's very synthy. It pulls you into that idea of combining waveforms with noise and then without noise, blending that in, blending that back out again. I don't often use noise in my Eurorack, so I find it interesting to turn that in. I don't always like it being there. I'm more often than not turning it off. But bringing it in adds this texture, particularly when you've got interesting things with a filter going on. Have I fully understood this filter envelope? No, not really. I sort of get it to a degree, and you can find the sweet spots as you're going through it, but it's just not as intuitive as a regular filter, because I know regular filters pretty well. With this one, I always just seem to be fiddling with it. It's not a battle. It's a nice fiddling, and you do find it, and then you move something else and you go, oh, okay, so that can be interesting. That adds something different that I hadn't thought of. So it's not going to be as predictable or as intuitive, perhaps, as an envelope you're more used to. But that doesn't make it bad or worse. It just makes it kind of different. I'm finding the blending of the sine wave really interesting. It's one of those things where, I mean, it's lovely by itself. It's a lovely sine wave by itself. Again, it brings in a different texture. So if you're using a sequence in the Deckard's voice, you can pull everything else out and it just leaves this lovely tinkliness, particularly as you can stuff the octave up higher just as a change, and then drop the other things back in and bring it back in. It's a lovely way of varying what's going on just in the one module. But then also it sounds really nice with it in. There's this roundness that I mentioned, this softness that comes from that, and it beefs out the sound somehow. While at the same time, when you pull it out, it feels really fresh and really sparkly at that point. So perhaps you're going to find that you're not going to use it for anything particularly static. You're forever going to be changing that sound, altering that tone, tweaking it just a little bit, because you can, because it's there, because you're sequencing it. Generally, you're not using both hands to play a massive paddy synth. This is a mono synth. It's in Eurorack. You're going to be sequencing it possibly, or playing it from a single note, leaving you a hand free to explore and to push and to just tweak that little bit. I'm also finding the high pass, low pass filter thing quite interesting. Again, I'm a fan of a low pass filter. I like a good low pass filter. That tends to be where I do my filtering the most. And so I've found it interesting introducing the high pass filter and just sort of discovering what that does. And there's points at which where you're playing with both that you just find this different sound that I wasn't expecting. Another, a synthesizer sound more than something you commonly find in Eurorack, I find. And so that brings another little piece of life to it. It was interesting certainly bringing the waveforms out, running those through a different filter, because the waveforms themselves sound great and are useful, and to blend them differently gives you, another place to play. It also drones out of those. So I know I said earlier that you have to always be using the gate. That's only if you want to use the full voice. If you just want to pull the waveforms out, those are there all the time, including a mix out, which just gives you the lot in one go. So running that through something else, quite interesting. Gives you another flavour. But otherwise, I'm most happy, I think, using the voice by itself. There's plenty of modulation opportunities here, and that does broaden things and create more possibilities. But I'm very, very happy working within the voice itself. It's a bit like with the Mother 32. The Mother 32 you can use completely fine without having to mess about in that patch bay at all. And this is very similar. There's no requirement to modulate, but you can if you want. Certainly bringing in some synced modulators that are synced to your sequence can create different rhythms within the Deckard's voice, which is interesting because the built-in LFO isn't synced to anything. It's just fast, slow, and somewhere in between. You have to do it much more on feel. Although with that being there, with this internal LFO, it really does remove a lot of the need for these extra Eurorack patch points. However, once you do get modulating and feel around with them, they then become more useful. It just depends on how you're using it. But there's no doubt that the Deckard's voice shines when you plug in a keyboard. Start to play that way. Add a delay. Add a lot of reverb. And it's a dreamy, dreamy thing. Because it's a module in Eurorack, you tend to think of it in bleeps and bloops, into short bits, into bass lines and stuff. That's great, that's fine, it can do that. But because it comes from a synthesizer, it does lend itself really well to longer, synthesized, keyboardy, kind of performed sounds as well. And that's quite refreshing in a Eurorack space. So there you are, the Deckard's voice. It's a beautiful thing. I love the build quality, I love the look, I love the sound, I love the chewability of the moving about and the modulation, and you know, it's just a great piece of work, I have to say. I wish it had some lights. I'd really like it to have some lights. That would be nice. Lights, sub-oscillator as well. Yeah, that's the other thing. When I put the on-air oscillator through the filter in here and step that down an octave, that was really nice. It really beefed it up. So that's something that perhaps it's lacking, would be if you could step one of the waveforms down an octave. Whoa, I mean, that would be superb, because that really worked well running something else through that as well. So I definitely enjoyed that. But as a semi-modular synthesizer, which is what it is, it's just brilliant. I would take one of these over a Mother 32 or a No Coast or any of those other little monosynths any day. Any day. And it is priced around about the Mother 32 sort of level. But of course, you don't get the case, you don't get the sequencer and the little keyboard and all those sorts of bits and pieces that the Mother 32 may bring. But you do get a very uniquely vintage Japanese sound. So there we go. I hope that was helpful, useful to people out there. I'm sorry if this has gone on too long. There's just a whole load of different sounds available in it. I did a couple of other videos, one with sort of slow sounds and one with faster sounds, that you'll also find on my YouTube channel. You'll also find my now nearly 2-year-long build into the Deckard's Dream, which is coming to a close. It's coming to an end. The end is in sight, I believe. So that's exciting, but do dig into that journey as well. Otherwise, thank you, Bob at Black Corporation, for lending me this Deckard's voice. If it has to go back, it has to go back. And if it does, I'm selling things in order to acquire one when they are out, because they are about to be released any time, I believe. After a long period of thinking and dwelling and production issues because of COVID and such like and so on, it's finally going to be here. And then a whole load of better experts will be able to give you a view on what they think of it. But hopefully I've given you something to think about. And in the meantime, go and make some tunes.